Welcome to the Everyday Citizens Tactical Podcast, episode 36, Auto Rifles. My name is Jeremy, and as always, I will be your host. In this episode, we dive into the topic of auto rifles and other small unit-friendly support weapons as conversation continues to circulate about building the American Minuteman. Our guest for this episode is John, better known as NightFighter on Instagram, who previously served in the Marine Corps Infantry and is now an avid supporter for the auto rifle movement. So, count your brass, load your mags, and let's dive in.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Straight the numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours. Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Straight the numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody, and John, welcome onto the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Most people probably know you as NightFighter on Instagram, but folks might not know a lot about you, so if you want, go ahead and give everybody a little bit about you and what you are and what you're about.
Well, let's see. My background is I did 5 years in the Marine Corps. After that, I don't talk about this very much, but I've been a police officer for 7 years and started a gear company, started making gear and doing tactical things on Instagram. So that's basically where I started off.
I gotcha. Does your company have like a separate page, or are you just kind of running it all off the NightFighter page?
I just run it off Instagram, yeah.
Gotcha.
I take orders through direct message and all that stuff.
I gotcha. Cool. And then obviously, Strife 17, you guys do a ton of content crossover and whatnot. How'd you, get to know him?
I talked to him on over Instagram for a few years, and I'd say we just think the same on a lot of different stuff. And then he ended up in Arizona, so we started meeting up and training.
Nice. I definitely say that you guys, I take a liking to your guys' content a lot more because it's not, how should I say, cheesy content per se. Like, you guys are actually out, in the desert wearing realistic heavy kit and like actually doing productive drills instead of just three mag plate carriers and seeing how fast you can sprint on a flat range.
Yeah, we're out there. Last time we were out there, pretty much 24 hours straight of training. We didn't even sleep. So we're out there getting it.
And I think that's something a lot of civilians who weren't prior, it's kind of like an adjustment for them per se, whether they're training with just like a buddy or two or they're training with like an actual civilian organization, is that you don't have, a week to 4 weeks to go to the field. So like when you go do, any type of FTX or long training, like you just got to go for like 24, 48, 72 hours just straight, and it's going to suck. You're not going to sleep a lot, but you got to take advantage of that time.
Yeah. Yeah, don't get me wrong. We tried to lay down for an hour or two, but it was 1:05 at night, and it wasn't happening. Like I was laying on my ISO mat, no warming layers, still just sweating my balls off. So we were basically like, all right, let's just keep going. We're not going to get any sleep.
Yeah. But good nonetheless. Main topic we brought you on today, obviously, as people can see from the title, is pretty much all about auto rifles, and we both have the mutual friend Cody, who owns Red Right Hand, and is probably one of the biggest pushing factors right now when it comes to the idea of the auto rifle in the American rifleman kind of conversation right now. How did you get involved with the auto rifle stuff, and how did you come to meet Cody?
I found his page on Instagram, and I instantly saw the usefulness behind it, because I had also been in the Marines and seen the M27s in use. And I was in during a time also, and it was kind of cool for me. I served from 2009 to 2014. So my first few years we had saws. The last few years we had auto rifles, and I got to see the transition and the difference it made in the performance and the capabilities. And so once I saw his page, I'm like, this is the way, essentially. To quote, who is it, The Mandalorian that says that? I just instantly saw how useful this could be and how this could increase the civilians' firepower, because it's essentially just an M16 with a heat mitigation system. Like, it's not any different, really, than your rifle. And that's one thing we could talk about too, is like a lot of people view it as some special purpose thing. Like, oh, I'm going to bring this when I need to do suppressive fire. It's like, no, it's just a rifle. It just has heat mitigation stuff on it. So you can use it as a standard rifle any other time, and if you need to lay down high volumes of fire, you can do that. And so having already, I never personally used the M27 when I was in. I was a squad leader when we got them. So I was in charge of like employing them, essentially. But nonetheless, I understood their advantages and how they could be applied for a civilian.
Yeah.
So I bought one within a few months of seeing his page.
Yeah, I talked about the M27 when he came on the podcast a few months ago, and because I carried the M27 in the Marine Corps, my unit didn't necessarily have the logistics for belt-fed weapons just based on what we were doing. So the idea behind it was, all right, we'll just give some guys some M27s to quote-unquote increase the capabilities and the rate of fire. And you're right, it was just a rifle. Like, most of the time, I didn't carry 14 plus mags. I normally carried probably 8 on my kit plus 1 or plus a drum. And it wasn't until like our security posture changed that I would put an additional 6 to 8 mags on my kit, just because there was no reason to always walk around with 14 plus mags. It was just a rifle until you really, really needed it to be something else. But I wish I wish the Marine Corps had done a little bit better job introducing what the idea behind essentially the LSW was supposed to be, because the U.S. military didn't really entertain that idea for decades at this point. When we think the early 2000s in GWAT, they kind of just threw it back into the Marine Corps and didn't really do anything to promote it or teach guys about it at all.
No, they didn't. And like I said, I was there when we first got them, and they literally were just like, here you go, and didn't explain. At first, the IAR gunners didn't get any extra mags than the rest of us. So I got my 7 mags issued to me, so did the IAR gunner, when he probably should have been issued 12 at a minimum.
Yeah, I think our unit, the standard was you get 7 with your standard issue, and then IAR gunners go back and they got an additional 7 from the armory.
Yeah, and I've heard that they have developed at least some SOPs and stuff like that for the M27s now. But when we got them, it was like just kind of figure it out on your own. But it was. I was immediately impressed by them once we transitioned, because now you have a gun. Because people always talk about, oh, well, what are you going to do with that big gun in CQB, right? Well, a belt fed is even worse than CQB, right? So now you have a gun that can provide high volumes of fire, but still do every infantry task just like the rifleman can. You're not over encumbered by an auto rifle when you're doing CQB or anything like that. Versus a saw. I mean, if you have a malfunction with a saw and you're in a confined structure, have fun. Yeah.
No, it's definitely a lot more lengthy of a process, especially when you're just stuck standing in a hallway to fix a belt fed versus fix a IAR that's the same manual of arms as your M4 or M16.
Exactly, yeah. And enemies are standing 10 feet away in the next room. It's not going to be good.
And that's the other thing I think that a lot of people overlook on the civilian world, or maybe even like more the bro vets that kind of shit on the idea of the LSWs and MSWs, is that the manual of arms being the same to the standard American AR is so beneficial for knowledge transfer. because there's already so much you got to learn, because a lot of people aren't prior service, or even guys that were prior service didn't use, belt feds to any degree. That's one less hurdle that you have to, overcome, is that, hey, the manual arms is the same exact thing as what you have sitting in your safe at home right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned before, it's, I have the 20-inch version, so mine is the same as all my other 20-inch rifles. It just has heat mitigation systems on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've often said too that it's like the red right hand upper is like superior to the M27 because of that, because the M27 didn't have any heat mitigation.
Oh no, it is 100%. We have, let's see, the MSW we have is red right hand, their new Recce Mar, but the two LSWs we have are from Klein Machining, with the barrel mounted M60 bipods, and that was before we figured out who red right hand was. And you can even, and I love Klein Machining, and they also are a big, proponent and push for the auto rifleman. But you can definitely see like that long-term performance difference between the red right hand upper and the Klein Machining upper, because the Klein Machining upper gets hotter at an exponential rate faster than the red right hand.
Yeah, I haven't used Klein Machine. I saw the videos that Brent 0331 made about them, but that's about all I know.
They're great guns. They still are. I mean, the Klein Machining is still a great option for LSWs, but the heat mitigation system that Cody's put out changes the game. And I don't want to officially say, but I'm pretty sure that they've been working together to kind of continue to prop each other up and do some cross projects. So you may see that, kind of cross the board eventually. But
that's good. Yeah, I think the one thing I would say about the Klein Machine is I think they make more of, like the red right hand, you can use it just like a rifle, because even at outward appearance, it's just a 24-inch AR-15.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think the Klein Machine, they make the one with like the 26-inch barrels, right?
I think Klein Machining's is 24 inches.
24, okay.
And you can chop it down. Red right hand comes in the 20-inch Recce LMG version, and then the 16 or 16 and a half inch version for the Recce IAR. I'm pretty sure.
But what I was going to say is like the Recce IAR might be more versatile, but like with Klein Machine, if you wanted like a dedicated suppressive weapon with a 24-inch barrel, you could go that route. I don't know how much velocity a 24-inch barrel throws out, but it's got to be pretty significant.
So it's interesting. I've looked at because I've focused on this topic a lot, specifically because of the LSWs. And you look back at the velocity statistics from like M16 variants and different barrel lengths and whatnot, and 5.56 peaks right between 20 inches and a 22-inch barrel. And the velocity, if I remember correctly, of a 24-inch barrel is essentially the same as an 18-inch barrel. So like if you go too high, velocity starts to drop off, just like if you start going low. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. And I think a lot of that started from because people were doing comparisons from the M16 to the M4, because there was always the question, of barrel length and whatnot, and like how much are you trading off. So then that's where the rest of the testing kind of came in. So right around, I'm pretty sure Cody's Recce LMG sits right at 20 inches, which I think is like ideal. It's right there, like your peak velocity for 5.56.
Yep. Yeah, that's why I run a 20.
And honestly, when you're thinking about the Recce LMG and the IAR are just rifles at the end of the day. They really are. They're just rifles with some added additions. But when you start trying to think of all right, how can I maximize this potential capability? You want to try to maximize that velocity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I've been trying to counter online is that, these things aren't special purpose weapons. They're just rifles that you can shoot rapid fire for longer periods of time without destroying your rifle.
Mm-hmm. And you will. A lot of people say that civilians don't put enough rounds on their rifles to damage them from the higher rates of fire. But most of your mid-tier rifles, if you actually train on a normal basis, if you go from putting 200 or 300 rounds in a day down a rifle to putting down 1,500 rounds a day through your rifle when you train, like there's going to be a difference in any decent length of time.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
I mean, even like the gas systems as a whole and whatnot on your standard mid-tier ARs are not built to take that kind of rate of fire compared to something that's purpose-built.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen some people build their own, which is fine, but just it's not going to be to the same level as the red right hand upper.
No. But I think I do like the idea sometimes of people building their own, because it kind of gets like people in their area, maybe their groups, to buy into the idea, because I mean it is an expensive endeavor nonetheless.
Yeah.
But if you do that, you might be able to gauge buy-in.
You can, yeah. I didn't think about that actually, but I would say just make sure you do it right, because I've seen. I saw a video where a guy was talking about how expensive Klein Machine and Red Right Hand are, and then he built the jankiest of IARs, and I don't know if you've seen those JP Enterprises heat sinks you can buy to put on your barrel. That's essentially what he did, and he's like, "See, it's just as good." It's like, but that's the problem. He's doing the whole just as good thing. Like, oh, just as good, and it's never gonna match what Red Right Hand's done, because he spent the time and money and researched how to do it best. So, the difference between one of those JP Enterprises heat sinks and what Cody does is he puts the heat mitigation system up against the gas block in the chamber where the barrel gets the hottest, as well as the length of the entire barrel under the handguard. It doesn't extend to the end of the barrel, but and then you also have heat sink on the gas tube itself, which to my knowledge you can't just buy those types of things and put them on your gun.
At least not right now.
Yeah, at least not right now.
I had a buddy from Texas who he did kind of the cheap route first. He himself had built out like an 18 or 20 inch mid-tier AR, and then just slapped like a pretty, again, like a mid-tier bipod on it, 3G60 in it, and he ran it around for a while and was like getting people into the idea of the LSW, and then finally this spring the group of like 8 of them or whatever all chipped in, and then they bought a proper Red Right Hand Recce LMG.
Cool.
So it's definitely something that can be essentially crowdfunded or group funded and turned into a group asset if you have that type of personal dynamic with the people you train with. Obviously, if you're just by yourself and you happen to shoot with guys from time to time, you're going to have to build it out yourself. But if you're in a more established relationship per se with all of these people, the idea of funding group assets or group capabilities is a greater chance.
Yeah, and I think mine was about $1,300. So between 5 or 6 guys, it's not a lot.
No. Yeah, I got it built out on my page right now. If you get the standard 20-inch Recce LMG with the 1-to-7 twist, and you get Red Right Hand's auto bolt carrier and charging handle, it's about $1,500 flat.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how I started too. I built my own at first. I bought a 18-inch SPR barrel from Ballistic Advantage, and that was my LSW for a few months until I bought the Red Right Hand. So,
have you been able to get your hands on the Recce Mar yet? The MSW?
No, and I'm really not interested.
Really?
No, not really. I'm happy with just the LSW.
Sure. I think, and I've told people this in the past because people have messaged me asking if they should get an MSW or an LSW. And I basically said, like, unless you are above a squad size element of buddies, there's really no reason to think bigger. The LSW does fine for the small group.
Yeah, and I think the MR, the medium support weapon or medium automatic weapon is great, because now guys have an option for 308. Just personally, just not interested in it.
I got you. it's definitely presented its own logistical challenges, but man, does this thing eat. I love it. It's
Yeah, I mean, now you have a much easier to employ 308 option for civilians.
mm-hmm.
So it's a great idea, and especially if you can support it. But yeah, just run the LSW, keep it simple,
Sure.
and yeah, but you never know. Maybe one day.
Yeah, I tell you, the 100-round drum for 5.56 is definitely a lot cheaper than a 100-round drum for 308.
Yeah, absolutely. And
like
the other thing
several $100s.
Yeah, I bet. The other thing is, I don't own any 308 weapons. Like, all my guns are 9mm or 223.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty much, I stick to those two calibers.
Yeah, this was my first 308 gun as well. Everything else was 5.56 or 9mm. Outside of like my hunting rifles for different game. But
yeah,
in this regard, pretty much everything was standardized to 9mm and 5.56.
Yeah, and I was the same way. But have you heard? I don't know if you've heard this term or not, but some people have referred to these guns as area denial weapons.
I have heard that term thrown around a few times.
What do they mean when they say that?
I think what they're referring to is using these in like a specifically like defensive manner.
Okay.
And not using them in like an assault or like a mobile operation type thing.
Okay.
Like they're thinking specifically like I built some DPs around my farm and I just set it up on a field or an approaching road and like this is my area denial.
Gotcha. Okay. Because I don't want to make any accusations, but the people I've seen use that phrase also have a very high body fat percentage. So I don't know if they think they can just sit there and like shoot at people and they're never going to maneuver back on them. Like if you think the enemy's just going to sit still and not find a way around your defenses. So, and that's kind of what I thought people meant by that. I just wasn't sure because I couldn't find a true definition of it.
I honestly haven't seen like any big pages or,
well, one thing I've noticed
talk about it.
One thing I've noticed is people tend to pick a kit and a strategy that fits their body type and their fitness level.
Ah.
So, like I said, the area denial weapon guys all seem to be they got the inner tube around their waist. Their hips are wider than their shoulders.
Sure.
And I guess I just want to take a moment to caution anybody listening against thinking of this gun as that, because the only real area denial method is patrolling and LPOPs, observing the area. You have to be active. You can't shut yourself in to a location because the walls are going to close in around you.
Yeah, defensive operations as a whole is so much more than I'm just going to sit here on the tree line and wait. Like there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah, and also any military strategist, you view defense as a phase, not a permanent thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is a phase in an operation. Now, of course, if you have a homestead, obviously you're going to be defending it permanently, but you shouldn't just be sitting there,
sure,
thinking that a gun is going to deny an area.
Yeah. This is something that's commonly talked about, specifically with people who don't like the idea of LSWs and whatnot. What is your opinion on civilian belt feds versus the LSW concept?
Well, to my knowledge, the belt feds are much more expensive to get into.
A lot more expensive.
For
a fight light, you're looking at $7,000 before extra barrels or the lower, and 249s before trigger upgrades are like $9,000 to $12,000.
Yeah, and so bigger money buy-in, and then you have to feed it linked ammo, which you can buy links online. I actually looked it up.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you can actually get them really cheap.
Yeah, but you're gonna have to sit there and string all your ammo together unless you can find it already linked somewhere. But that's probably going to be more expensive. Links for 223 and 308 are made with ditch metal, so who knows how long they're going to last. Like the metal's not good quality.
Mm-hmm.
And belt feds inherently cause more malfunctions just due to the nature that they fire more rounds, and the links aren't as reliable as a box mag in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But I've never seen a 240 as reliable as those are. I've seen them have malfunctions at least once when we were out training with them. And then you lose the logistics that the LSW gives you because you're no longer using box mags. People have to carry links now. And then one thing that always comes up with 20-inch guns is people start commenting about their precious CQB. Mm-hmm. How will I do CQB with this? Isn't it heavy? Isn't it so heavy? My arms are weak. I can't carry this 20-inch rifle. Well, the fight light, you're essentially building a saw, mm-hmm. which is heavier. So now you're at a heavier system, and your precious CQB is going to be more difficult when you have a malfunction or even wielding that gun, because at a certain point, a gun does become unwieldy in close quarters, and that's what a saw is. Mm-hmm. So like the LSW gives you the ability or the capabilities of greater mobility, greater accuracy, and logistical ease. Right.
I think that's the two big driving points is mobility and logistics.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's never going to match the rate of fire of a belt fed, mm-hmm. but you gain everything else that I just mentioned.
Yeah, which when you're already limited on pretty much everything we just mentioned, obviously it's going to be more ideal. Now, I think that if you're a civilian or civilian organization, you 100% should buy belt feds. Just know that just because you now have belt feds does not mean you have unlimited belt fed potential, unless you have a factory to give you constant supplies and a very large force. Because if you're just 4 dudes with a belt fed, it's like, well, that's not gonna work for very long. You still have limitations.
Yeah, it's gonna need a bigger support system, and 4 guys may or may not be able to support that. Like the Marine fire team, like I said, when I first got in, we had saws, but that was with the backing of the U.S. military's logistics. Mm-hmm. We could go to the Connex and pull thousands of rounds of linked ammo.
Yeah.
It's just sitting there in storage, and civilians don't necessarily have that. The other thing, too, is we all agree that civilians have poor logistics. Not that it's non-existent, but it's poor. And you don't control the ammo that you come across on the battlefield. You're much more likely to come across 223 rounds in little boxes, mm-hmm. like that they come from the factory in, than you are linked ammo.
And that's what I've always said is like, the issue is not necessarily whether you will have ammo or not. There is a plethora of 223 and 5.56 all over this country. It's what form of 5.56 are you going to find? Is it going to be linked? Is it not going to be linked? Can you link it if you need to link it? Oh, you don't have any more links because
you shot them all.
Yeah, you shot them all. They were all disintegrating, and now the few hundred pre-bought links you have are gone. But
yeah, and if you're serious, if you really want to get into belt feds, I would seriously consider, on top of carrying extra linked ammo, just carry extra links.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, you are carrying one more thing that you wouldn't need if you just had an LSW.
Yeah, we are currently we're really deep into this whole project right now. So we have the 2 LSWs, we have the MSW. One of my buddies is building out the HK21 kit right now. So that's 7.62 by 51 belt fed, European block. And then we had a guy just 2 days ago pre-order a new product that will rival the fight lights. So we're going to have a whole lot of capabilities in different forms, and I'm going to do a ton of YouTube content just like talking about the difference in employments for the different systems, the logistics and everything, because it's all different. Just because you have a fight light doesn't mean you're going to be able to think of it in the same way as you will an LSW, or you have a belt fed versus a magazine fed, whatever it is.
Yeah, and another thing to think about with belt feds is, to really maximize their capability, you got to be able to mount it to a tripod.
Mm-hmm.
Marine Corps doctrine is, at least with the 240, 900 meters on a bipod is your max effective range, 1,800 meters on a tripod. And I think the SAW was similar, but I don't think people think about that either. Like, if you're really going to maximize that system, you need to be able to put it on a pintle mount and, really put down a solid beaten zone and use that thing to its full potential.
Yeah. I think you guys are the first, you and Strife are the first pages I've seen actually put the LSWs on a tripod. And I really wasn't, I have a tripod spec'd out right now, but I also need $800 for the pintle and the tripod itself and, all of that. The Picatinny conversion. I really want to use it for the MSW because the 308 it's just so much more effective on the tripod versus the bipod.
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of people have said, like, well, aren't you just turning it back into like a belt-fed system? Like, no, people use tripods for precision shooting, like what they call their special purpose rifles, which I disagree with that term completely, but their precision AR-15s, they use tripods for it. Why can't you use it when you're doing rapid fire?
Mm-hmm.
So Strife actually bought an M1919 tripod like you use on a 240 or something. I just use my my rifle tripod that you would use for precision shooting.
Mm-hmm.
But I might have to get, after seeing him do it, I might have to get an M1919 because that thing, you've seen a 240 tripod, it's essentially the same. Mm-hmm. That thing really anchors to the ground, and you can also stake it to the ground or sandbag it, whatever you need.
Man, they are expensive.
Yeah, I'm looking at one right now, actually, $250.
Oh, that's better than the one I was looking at. One for $400. And hell, most of them you find that are like in pretty good condition are more like $600-700. Yeah,
this one doesn't come with any. You don't have any mounts or anything. It's just the tripod.
Yeah. Yeah, that part of it can definitely get really expensive, and you don't need a tripod to employ the LSWs. If you don't have I would say if there's a lot of knowledge gaps on employing the LSWs in a proper like auto rifleman role and understanding rates of fire, fields of fire, in the various stages of the engagement, a tripod shouldn't be your area of concern. You should spend $600 on ammo before you buy the tripod.
Yeah, and I mean, just for anyone listening, like with rapid fire weapons, with suppressive weapons, you have something called your cone of fire and your beaten zone, right? Mm-hmm. It's a fancy way of saying the spread of the rounds as they hit the ground, or the cone of fires when they fly through the air. The beaten zone is when they hit the ground. A tripod is just going to help you tighten that up.
Yeah.
Tighten up your beaten zone so it'll allow you to do suppressive fire effectively at longer ranges. But like you said, probably not the first thing you should run out and buy. Focus on training with it, understanding how to employ it. You should probably learn how to do a range card before you go buy a tripod.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really serious about covering a field of fire as a auto rifleman.
Have you guys really dove into or talked much about the adjustment of rates of fire for the LSWs versus like traditional belt feds, or are you guys just sticking to standard doctrine?
I don't think me and Strife have talked about it. Me personally, I've developed my own auto rifle rates of fire. Mm-hmm. So it was, and I'm still working on this. So, if these sound weird, maybe they are, but sustained rate is 2 rounds every 3 seconds. I'm calling it like the interim rate is 4 rounds every 3 seconds, and rapid rate is 6 rounds every 3 seconds.
Gotcha. I think the way we've kind of broken it down is the time. We tried to keep the time frames similar to conventional doctrine, but we edited the actual round count. So obviously that changes the total rounds. We did sustained rate 4 to 6 rounds every 6 seconds for no longer than a total of 6 minutes. We did rapid rate of 6 to 8 rounds every 3 seconds for no longer than 2 minutes, and then kept it the same cyclic for 1 minute.
Gotcha. Yeah, and the reason I adjusted mine to those is the box mags have all the current rates of fire that you can look up are based on belt-fed machine guns.
Yeah.
And it's harder to sustain those with box mags. So I made those adjustments just to, because if we're going to accept that a LSW isn't a belt-fed and it's never going to match the volume of fire, I adjusted them for that purpose.
No, yeah, and you definitely have to. It's something you got to consider.
Yeah, and the other thing too is you can afford to lower the rate of fire a little bit because the LSWs are going to be more accurate in general than your belt feds.
Yeah,
you're gonna like that 2-round burst that I use. I'm able to double tap targets at around 200 yards. Double tap steel targets.
And the other thing you got to keep in mind is that, whenever you adjust these rates of fires, is you have to think about the heat buildup in those time frames. You're not gonna be able to compete with belt feds who can just perform a barrel swap. You have to actually let your rifle cool down. Even with the heat mitigation system, you can only run it for so long before it needs a break.
Yep. Yeah. And even Cody will tell you that it's at a certain point it will start to get too hot.
Mm-hmm. I think he just said. I think I was texting him yesterday or the day before, and he told me he just bought a bunch of rounds to start doing like a cook-off testing for the different length of barrels right now to see like what true round count do you have to reach to start getting cook-offs.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess it's still gonna be pretty high.
It's gonna be high.
Yeah, you're gonna have to get into the thousands of rounds, so you're still gonna get a lot out of it before it cooks off. And I mean, I don't know if you saw the video where we did talking guns, but within like a minute, I had fired 300 rounds, and the handguards were hot, but I could still pick them up with my bare hands and carry them. So it didn't injure me when I grabbed the handguard.
Yeah. It's funny that same week you guys posted the Talking Guns video. We had just recorded a Talking Guns video with the LSWs that weekend.
Oh yeah. Great minds think alike.
Great minds think alike. And that's something, and that kind of goes back to like that skill carryover I was talking about earlier, is that a lot of the things that promote the efficiency of the belt feds, like Talking Guns, sectors of fire and responsibilities and all that, a lot of that carries over to the LSWs and MSWs. Just because it's not a belt fed doesn't mean you can't accomplish some basic tasks in the same regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've discussed that before. I made a video talking about LSWs versus belt feds. And the only real disadvantage that I could find was when you're in the defense and you have to fire your final protective line. That's where the real disadvantage is, because you can't just crank the gun over to your FPL and let off a belt of ammunition. You're going to fire your 30 rounds and then you're going to reload and fire again. Yeah. So that there is going to be a break in the gunfire. And, just in case people don't know, FPL is final protective line is you're in a defense, you're about to be overrun. On your range card, you have a final protective line set up where you point the gun towards that line and you just start shooting in an attempt to kill the attackers. It's like a last-ditch effort. That is where you have a distinct disadvantage. Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, because you can't just rip off a 200-round belt. No. But other than that, not too much of a disadvantage.
And another thing to think about if you're a group of guys, editing rates of fire is kind of like an SOP. Another thing to think about, and you mentioned it, was the talking guns. And that's one thing we considered on why we did every 6 seconds for our sustained rate instead of every 3 seconds, is because it is set up the idea that we have multiple LSWs per squad.
Yeah.
One per fire team. So depending on what you're doing, obviously you're not always going to be having talking guns going on, but depending on what you're doing, the idea behind it is that hopefully, you are performing that task with other people. So your rate of fire is really higher than it is based on just the individual.
Yeah. And probably the best thing about the talking guns is the way the enemy perceives it, because you might be firing 6 rounds and then you're waiting for the other guy to shoot, or maybe other 2 guys to shoot. Mm-hmm. So you're waiting, 10 to 14 seconds in between your rounds, but the enemy thinks you're firing cyclic, because it's just a constant string of fire. Because once you're done shooting, the next guy shoots, then the next guy shoots, then you shoot again. So the enemy perceives it as just a constant stream of fire.
Yeah. Plus, it helps keep guns up longer because
absolutely, yeah.
Obviously, downfall box-fed magazines. There's a more often reload time per se with the box-fed magazines, especially once you've burned through maybe your first D60 and now you're just stuck with 30-round mags. Talking guns, again, doesn't break up that constant fire. There's always rounds going down range.
Yeah. You can stretch out your ammo a little bit more because you have other people helping you. It's just cool.
Yeah. And that's really what it's about. It's just, are you being cool?
Yeah, I mean, ABC, always be cool.
Always be cool. One other thing, and this has kind of came up in conversation because we are dabbling into the belt-fed side now that we have LSWs and MSWs. And this will kind of be the way we gauge content moving forward, is that LSWs in the civilian space, and really you probably even argue for the conventional space, but the civilian space, LSWs and MSWs are really, really good at high intensity offensive operations and mobile operations where you have to commonly get in and out of vehicles. And belt feds are very good at defensive operations where you're required to move a lot less. Because I think a lot of people think when it comes to civilian operations or organizations per se that you're just always going to be offensive and doing that kind of stuff, when the reality is the majority of what you may ever do, if you ever find yourself in those shoes, is you're going to be doing defensive operations, whether that's static or mobile.
Yeah.
But in the event that you're doing both, LSWs and MSWs are going to be a lot more ideal for actually conducting assaults, raids, and ambushes over belt feds, depending on the type of ambush you're doing.
Yeah, and when you talk about being an unconventional force, you're not going to stand out as being the guy with the big gun.
Mm-hmm. That's another big thing, because the enemy's got designated marksman too.
Yeah, if you talk about being targeted, one of the things you learn in the military is priority of targets. Mm-hmm. Who's always the top priority? The biggest weapon systems, right? The most casualty producing weapon systems are the ones we want to kill first. With an LSW, you don't look like you have anything special. You just look like a rifleman. Mm-hmm. So you have that advantage as well, yeah. And even on the conventional side, it provides an advantage, because I'm sure I meant conventional military side. So I'm sure you're familiar with like the Battle of Guadalcanal. Mm-hmm. I think part of the reason that the Marine Corps went with a auto rifle is for more accuracy, but also for just better logistics, because the Marine Corps is pretty good at thinking forward, right? And I think they see themselves in another Pacific War here in the next few decades. Mm-hmm. At the Battle of Guadalcanal, the Marines got stranded, right? The Japanese Navy came in and sank the U.S. Navy. The Marines were fighting on an island surrounded by Japanese ships. And the Marines were still able to get some supplies in, but they had to resupply 3 different calibers of weapon. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, if that happens again to the Marines, they can just supply them with magazines and 5.56. Mm-hmm. In terms of ammo, right? Because everything's standard, all the way down to what your auto rifleman uses. Just a box mag with 5.56.
Yeah, the Battle of Guadalcanal is definitely an interesting topic, because it's so long. Like, most people think battles, they're like a few weeks. That was like a 6-month battle for that chain of islands.
Yeah, yeah, and the U.S. was not always on top. Like there was a period where we were losing that battle, or barely hanging on. But I just wanted to point that out because a lot of people will say, well, the military uses belt feds and it's a better option. Not always. If your logistics are strained, which can happen, we've been spoiled by 20 years of GWAT where we always had whatever we needed. That's not always going to be the case. If you fight a real enemy, sometimes they're going to cut you off from your supplies. They're going to cut you off from support and whatever else. So
I've made that point a lot in the medical regard from like what we've seen from the war in Ukraine, is that in GWAT, pretty much anytime you got a casualty, almost always you could be evacuated within the hour from a helo. And what we've seen from the war in Ukraine and Russia is that is not the reality at all. And that if guys in the field don't understand anything more than tourniquet application, that casualties don't survive very long.
No, that's a whole nother can of worms to talk about, is like getting people long-term care after they're hit in a world where you don't have a hospital readily available or a casevac readily available,
And it goes for everything. How are you moving casualties? How are you going to collect water in the field? Because we've all seen the videos of, Russians just walking to collect water, and then they get a damn drone to drop a mortar on them, just carrying jerry cans. Like, logistics is not guaranteed by any means. We've definitely been spoiled.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's to the point where I saw a video the other day of these Russian soldiers were trying to get to some location. One of them got hit by a drone, and the other soldier just shot the guy to put him out of his misery.
I saw that
video. And speaking of medical care, drones are going to change the game too, And when I saw that video, I don't know if I didn't check the comments, but some people might look at that and be like, "Oh my God!" It's like, dude, in that situation, that might be the best option. Like if in that particular situation, doing a casevac might be suicide for the rest of the group. Like if there's other drones loitering in the area, and now you're carrying your buddy who weighs 180 pounds. You're moving even slower than you were before. Like, yeah, holy shit. It's a rough war going on over there.
It has definitely woken everybody up to the false reality, I think, that was being entertained prior to 2022 on what the next conflict would look like, or what a conflict in the U.S. may look like, and it changed a lot of minds.
Yeah, who would have thought it would be drone trench warfare?
I know. And then you got Israel over here using trebuchets.
Yeah. What were they doing with that? I saw that in passing online, but I didn't really look and watch what they were doing. So obviously they were launching something, but
yeah. So Israel was using trebuchets and bow and arrows to essentially conduct clearing operations of like vegetation and whatnot, because Hezbollah was getting so close to the Israeli border and these different military outposts that they would just walk right up to the tree line and throw rockets of a few hundred meters onto Israeli military outposts. So Israel was like, well, if Hezbollah is going to start wildfires in Israel, we'll start wildfires in Lebanon. So then they were just launching fireballs to essentially clear brush.
Jesus Christ. Yeah,
that's where we're at.
That's some medieval shit right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Props on them for knowing how to construct trebuchets still. I don't know how to build a trebuchet.
Yeah, hey, that's a skill that if you've got a group of people you train with, you might want to learn how to build a trebuchet. Because maybe not here where I'm at because we don't have trees, but theoretically you can build that siege weapon in the field.
You can. You definitely can. I won't. 'Cause I have no idea how to build a trebuchet. I guess I'll add it to my task list.
Well, the other thing you could do is just find a sturdy branch and peel it back to add tension. Kind of like when you're walking through the woods and the guy in front of you pulls the tree branch forward and then it hits you in the face.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd imagine you could just do that. I don't know. I'm not an engineer.
So what to kind of wrap up the auto rifle conversation, what would you say people like yourself, myself, Cody, and what do you think we need to do the most of to change minds on the ideas of auto rifles and promote the topic more? What could we do differently, or what should we be doing more of?
Well, I think, and I was actually on a podcast Monday talking about a similar thing, because they asked me, is the auto rifle just a trend?
Mm-hmm.
And we compared it to the recce rifle thing either a few years ago or last year. And with the recce rifle trend, people were right for the wrong reasons, right? Mm-hmm. So you started seeing people go to SPRs, special purpose rifles, whatever that means, when really that's just what a standard rifle should be. Mm-hmm. And but the focus was all about the rifles, right? So people are talking about recce, but they don't even know how to do a salute report. Mm-hmm. Okay, so with the auto rifle thing, I think we're already doing what we need to do, because yes, we are promoting a certain type of rifle, but we're also putting out the content to use these things. Like, the majority of my focus has been on how do you use the auto rifle. Mm-hmm. So it's not a trend. It, to me, and I've said this a number of times, this is the new standard for a fighting rifle, because now you have the capabilities of a 20-inch rifle with heat mitigation systems in case you need to put down high volumes of fire. And then I'm also putting out the info on how you use them. So versus the recce thing, which was just a focus on the rifle itself, which reconnaissance, for the most part, the weapon doesn't even matter. It's all about observing the area. You should be more focused on a good pair of binoculars in that case, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we just have to keep doing what we're doing, because if you show how to use these things, that's where people are going to go, I understand now. I understand the advantage of this thing. Because, like you mentioned, guys have sometimes built out their own IARs. And that's honestly, that's perfectly acceptable. Like, you don't 100% have to get a purpose-built LSW. The optimal option is to do that, but you can still get by with maybe a H-bar barrel in your upper and a D60. And once we are able to show the advantage of this thing and the fact that you can do it at different tiers. I did a whole video discussing different tiers of LSWs. Like, I had a budget option, mid-grade option, and then the red right hand option. Mm-hmm. Demonstrating that it's more about training and how you employ this thing versus the gear that you have. So that's I don't know if that was too long-winded, but basically, we just need to keep showing the advantages of the use of these weapons.
Sure. Yeah. I don't really think it's much of a trend. I don't even think it's popular enough to call it a trend at this point. But, I mean, I've been posting auto rifle content since the beginning of 2022, and I know Brent 0331's been posting it even longer than that.
Yeah, and he was another, I'll credit him too. Like, I found Cody's company and I watched Brent's videos around the same time, and that kind of got me wanting to build this weapon. So
yeah, I think I can't say it for sure, but I think Klein Machining was kind of like the one that started it all. I'm sure Cody was like in the same ballpark or the same time frame, but Brent 0331 and Klein Machining, with all of the one shepherd stuff they do, I think that's kind of like where the public idea came from.
Yeah, they hit the first domino, essentially. Mm-hmm. But I referred to it as a trend because I've heard other people refer to the auto rifle thing as a trend.
Sure.
Like, I've seen that comments on my posts, other people talking about it on their pages as the latest trend in the gun industry. I agree, it's not really that big. It's not like recce rifles where everybody was talking about it. Mm-hmm. And really, like I said, it's not a trend because this is just a standard rifle, an optimal rifle to fight with. So
Yeah.
you can call it a trend if you want to, if you think that effective equipment is a trend.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely think we've
And
got.
not you personally, just people who would say that.
I think we've definitely got some more, a little ways to go as far as people like us, like educating the community on its proper employment and support of it all. But I definitely think it's a good growing trend, we'll call it. I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and part of that is like there's me, you, Strife, and some other people talking about these things, but with the exception of admin results, I don't think any of the like super big pages have talked about auto rifles.
No, and the ones that have, I think, just did it for the clickbait on YouTube. Like they did a video on an upper, and that was it. Like they didn't promote the true idea or employment of it all by any means.
Yeah, and even admin results, I think it was just a video of him shooting it.
Yeah.
And he talked about it a little bit, but the moment Grand Thumb posts a video about this, suddenly everybody will care.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I just have to like get in Grand Thumb's DMs and bother him and threaten him or something.
Do it or else.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not with Leviathan anymore, so maybe.
Yeah, he's off the leash. Yeah, maybe so.
But, well, John, I appreciate you coming on to talk about the auto rifle. There's very few people in the quote-unquote community that are really working at this and have the time and exposure to it all, so I appreciate you coming on to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Is Instagram pretty much the only place guys can find you at?
Yeah, I have a backup page. It's NightFighter Fenris, like the chest rig that I make, the Fenris. So you can follow me at night_fighter_0 or NightFighter Fenris on Instagram.
Awesome.
And I do have a YouTube page, but it doesn't have the same following that my Instagram does. Mm-hmm. But if you want to watch the YouTube videos, which I've done an entire series on the LSWs, it's just NightFighter. And if you have trouble finding it, just type in NightFighter auto rifle. And like I said, I think I've got like 8 or 9 videos now just discussing auto rifles.
Awesome. All right. Well, of course, appreciate you coming on, man. Guys, go over, give him some support, show him some love, continue to build on that auto rifle concept. And I guess I'll have to hit up Strife and try to get him on here soon too.
Yeah, I think he'd be a good guest for you as well.
Cool. Well, all right, guys, that's all I've got for episode 36, Auto Rifles. As always, train hard, train often.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours. Tell me turn it down and I'm